Welcome to the last lecture of the BIO104 series, Conservation Biology. As discussed in previous lectures, human activities can cause disturbances in our systems. These disturbances can disrupt trophic structure, energy flow, as well as chemical cycling. There are many different strategies that we can employ in order to protect species that are threatened by human activities. These can include the restoration and preservation of habitats and threatened species, working on combating climate change and other mechanisms of global environmental change, by establishing regional networks of protected areas and also by protecting hotspots of biodiversity, and by combating the overharvesting of different species. In 2019, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services published their report on the state of the world's ecosystems. They concluded that nearly 1 million species currently face extinction as a result of human activity. Conservation biology is a field that integrates many disciplines in order to conserve the diversity of life. These different disciplines include molecular biology, genetics, evolutionary biology, ecology, physiology, as well as the social sciences, economics, and studies within the humanities. Many opposers will argue that extinction is part of the natural process of evolution. And yes, this, in theory, is correct. However, it is the unprecedented high rate of extinction that is of great concern. In general, species can be grouped according to their conservation status. We use the red list in order to define the severity and cause of a species extinction threat. Please refer to the chart below to understand the different categorizations that we can have, ranging from organisms that are species that are of least concern to those that are critically endangered, extinct in the wild, and eventually extinct. Also note that just because a species is not on the list, it may actually be reflective of the fact that its population and its status has not yet been evaluated, or the data is insufficient to determine or classify that species. Biodiversity can be defined in many different ways. Genetic diversity refers to the genetic differences that exist both within and between populations. In general, if the genetic diversity within a population is low, this will reduce the overall adaptive potential for a species. If you recall, natural selection needs genetic variability in order to work. Species diversity defines the number of species present within a given area. To date, it is estimated that we have cataloged 1.8 million species. However, it is also estimated that much more still remain undiscovered. Ecosystem diversity refers to the variety of ecosystems that are present. Extinction of one species may have profound impacts on many other species within the ecosystem. These different levels of diversity are interconnected and interrelated. This illustrates how biodiversity plays a very important role in the structure and function of ecosystems at multiple levels. In general, as humans with higher cognitive abilities, there is a moral obligation that we have to maintain our planet for ourselves, others, and as well as future generations. Biodiversity can be considered a natural resource. It can provide food, medicine, and textiles that can be used by the human population. Many of the medical benefits that exist within ecosystems have yet to be discovered. Genetic diversity can also help improve disease resistance in crops and has a great role to play in the agricultural industry. The rosy periwinkle, for instance, is unique and endemic to Madagascar. It can produce alkaloids that are known to inhibit the growth of cancer cells. The identification, cultivation, and use of this plant and the substances it produces has been valuable in the treatment of Hodgkin's lymphoma as well as various types of childhood leukemia. Natural ecosystems can support human survival. Thus, we can consider them as providing ecosystem services. Ecosystems can provide many benefits, such as they filter air and water systems, they can detoxify and break down waste material, they can diminish the impact of harsh and extreme weather and flooding, they provide pollinators, and they can also be used to manage pests and pathogens, and they also can create and preserve soils. To illustrate the value of an ecosystem, New York City invested $1.5 billion in order to restore the habitat in the Catskill Mountains.
This is done to purify their water supply coming into the city. This actually, in turn, saved the city $2 billion for a waste treatment facility, in addition to $300 million minimum per year in operational costs. Thus, investing in our ecosystem services is a much more ecologically sustainable and viable plan for the future. There are many human-derived threats that can occur to threaten our biodiversity. These threats can act on local, regional, as well as global scales. Habitat loss is one of these predominant threats. Much of our habitat can be changed or lost due to agricultural practices, development, forestry, mining, as well as pollution. Habitats can be lost entirely or they can be fragmented within a larger landscape. In general, smaller fragments of habitat or land have less species and higher risks of extinction. Introduced species are also a predominant threat. Species can be moved intentionally or unintentionally from native areas of origin to new regions. Usually when they occur in these new regions, they are now free from the typical pathogens and predators that were originally present in their original habitat. As a result, many of these species can spread very quickly and rapidly and can have damaging effects on other species or the new habitat in which they are found. Overharvesting is another major threat to biodiversity. This refers to the harvesting of organisms when it exceeds the population's ability to rebound. Large animals with low reproductive rates, like the elephant, are generally more susceptible, as well as small populations. Global change includes any alterations in climate, atmospheric chemistry, and ecological systems. Though stricter regulations have helped in decreasing our production of greenhouse gases and pollution, there is still much work to be done, as many ecosystems are very slow to recover. The diagram to the lower right describes the recovery of a lake from acid rain. Note that the pH has increased, however, this has taken a long period of time in order for this system to recover from the damages. Species-level conservation commonly focuses their effort on three main aspects of a population: conserving population size, genetic diversity, as well as conserving critical habitats. Many conservation efforts are dedicated to protecting population size. In general, small populations are more vulnerable to extinction. If numbers get too low, the population may experience an extinction vortex, which the population will then be driven to extinction very quickly over a short period of time. In general, smaller populations also tend to have lower levels of genetic diversity, which also contributes to a higher rate of extinction. When examining population size, the minimum viable population, or MVP size, is the minimum population size needed for a population to sustain itself. The effective population size, on the other hand, is the minimum number of breeding individuals that are needed to sustain the population. It's important to note that in general, the MVP will be much larger than the NE. This is because not all individuals within a population will mate and produce offspring. The formula for the effective population size is seen below and is typically reliant on the number of males as well as females within the population. Many conservation programs aim to sustain the effective population size well above the minimum viable population size. This will allow for enough genetic diversity for the populations to withstand environmental changes that they may encounter. Efforts to conserve the grizzly bear in Yellowstone Park involve population modeling such as this. Current predictions estimate that an effective population size of approximately 100 individuals would allow for bears to persist in the park for the next 100 years. Though there are nearly 700 bears in the park, reproduction is limited, as only the dominant males breed, as well as there is an age of reproduction. Locating a mate in this area may be difficult, and females only reproduce when resources are abundant. This means that out of the 700 potential bears that are within the population, only approximately 175 of those individuals would be considered to be part of the effective population size, thus illustrating the need to understand the population, how they breed, and the effective population size if we are truly to conserve these animals. In general, small populations tend to lose their genetic diversity very quickly over time. Genetic variability within a population can be estimated using various types of molecular techniques such as DNA sequencing and small tandem repeat STR analysis. Genetic diversity within a population can be maintained or increased through many different methods. They can be increased by increasing migration paths between populations that may be previously isolated, by introducing individuals from different populations, thus increasing the genetic diversity within a population, or promoting dispersal among a population. Though a population size may be large, the genetic diversity may be low, prompting concern for the overall survival of that species. Thus, the combination of understanding population size and genetic diversity is optimal when considering conservation plans. In addition, the amount of habitat and the type of habitat present also plays a role in conservation. Loss of a critical habitat can cause certain populations of species to suddenly decrease, even if their population size and genetic diversity is very high. Some species rely on specific species, resource, or habitat components in order to maximize their survival. An example of this is looking at the red-cockaded woodpecker. This woodpecker needs mature pine forests with low amount of undergrowth, as seen on the image to the left. They prefer this for their habitat. When drilling nesting holes in living pines, resin will ooze down the trunk, repelling predators like snakes. Identifying key habitat characteristics for this species is crucial to protecting this species and ensuring that they survive and do not become extinct. The physical features within a landscape can also play an important role in determining and maintaining biodiversity levels. Thus, understanding landscape structure is also another key factor in conservation ecology. Habitats contain boundaries or edges, which often have their own set of defining features. Some organisms can thrive in these edge habitats while others do not. When we increase the level of habitat fragmentation, we are essentially increasing the edge area around the habitats. These edge areas are usually exposed to higher wind levels, more sunlight, increased temperature, and less humidity than the interior zones. These characteristics are termed edge effects. As the size of the habitat fragments decrease, many populations will decline, particularly if this is the result from human alterations. Some species, such as the brown-headed cowbird, are very well adapted to edge habitats along forests. However, their ecological role is that they lay eggs and parasitize nests of many of our native songbird species. Thus, as the forests become more fragmented, cowbird populations tend to increase, having an overall negative effect on native songbird populations. White-tailed deer are also edge-adapted species. Their populations can increase rapidly in deforested areas. Movement corridors can be very useful in connecting fragmented habitats. As we can see in the image below, artificial corridors, like those placed on overpasses, are important in restoring some of the disturbance that is caused by habitat fragmentation that typically occurs when major roadways are developed. Movement corridors can help reduce inbreeding and increase the genetic diversity between the patches. This, in essence, will help keep population sizes stable. They can also help reduce mortality rates that are associated with roadways such as this. However, a downside or negative impact of corridors is that they can allow for the spread of diseases and pathogens between habitat fragments. Conservation efforts are also devoted to designating and protecting certain areas. Over 7% of our world's land is devoted to conservation reserves. These reserves may be defined on different characteristics. Reserves may include biodiversity hotspots. These are areas that contain a high number of endemic, endangered, or threatened species. Conservation reserves may also be nature reserves or zoned reserves. Nature reserves contain small areas of protected habitat amidst a habitat that has been altered, such as urban habitats. Zoned reserves, on the other hand, are extensive regions of undisturbed habitat that are protected. However, they are also used for economic gain.